Right, today we're talking about Nemesis, and we're specifically looking at her ultimate and protection reduction in general. Before I get started, a quick refresher on those of you who may have forgotten, or those of you who may not even know how protection reduction works. If you want some more details on that, I'll link a video from Rain Day down in the description that explains this in slightly more detail than I will here. I will have my own very extensive video on this topic soon. For now, we will just talk about this and I will give you a quick overview of how it works. This is no revelation to those of you who've been concerned with protection reduction in any way beforehand. However, the interactions are quite interesting, and even though the interaction here are all quite logical, there's nothing that should be surprising in any way. It was interesting me to confirm what I was assuming so far, and I just checking back on all those interactions and if they really work the way that they should do from the numbers. So, regarding penetration or protection reduction, there are 4 different types in that regard. You have percentage reduction, flat reduction, percentage penetration, and flat penetration. There are different items for those categories. We will not go into detail in this video. Like I said, I'll make another one for that. But let's look at how they work. Those different kinds of effects on protection work in a particular order. This order starts with percentage reduction. So any item or ability that applies protection reduction will be applied first. After that, flat reduction, so any value that's just minus 20 protection or whatever gets applied afterwards. Then percentage penetration applies. Different from reduction, it only applies to the player himself and not the whole team. And then flat penetration. Now, Nemesis Ultimate has 50% protection reduction. This means that it should always be applied first, as it is percentage reduction. There's an item that does the same thing, which is Executioner. Executioner goes up to 36% reduction. So, if you combine the Ultimate and Executioner, you should theoretically go up to 86% protection reduction. Let's run some simple math on this. If an enemy was to have 100 protections, after the Ultimate and Executioner, he would have 14 protections left. Going up to 220 protections, afterwards the enemy would have 30.8 protections left. If you go up to the maximum of 325 protections, the enemy would still only have 45.5 protections left. Now, keep in mind, this is only with Executioner. There are other protection reduction items in the game. One of them is Cutting Sowrd. After 3 hits, Cutting Sowrd will take 30 flat protections. So after 3 hits, you would have completely reduced 220 protections down to 0 if you used Nemesis Ult, Executioner, and Cutting Sowrd. This is the reason why Cutting Sowrd is so good on Nemesis, even though many people don't understand. Furthermore, Void Shield alone reduces protections by 20. This means if the enemy was to have less than 140 protections, the protections would still go down to 0. And even if the enemy had a lot more, the protections would be around 10 or whatever, which really doesn't matter. We took this to the extreme and went for the full 325 protections, the maximum protection cap for physical protection. You can't possibly get more protections than that. And even then, if you were to buy Cutting Sowrd and Void Shield, which you will hardly ever need, you would completely reduce the enemy's protections down to 0 with the Ultimate plus 3 hits. Most of the time, you won't even need that though. Most targets don't even get higher than 180 protections, so against at least 3 or mostly even 4 targets, you will probably deal pretty much true damage even if you only get Void Shield, and if you get Cutting Sowrd, you can be sure to deal true damage against most targets. Not only that, every physical damage dealer on your team deals true damage against that target as well. Interestingly enough, if you reduce your enemy's protections down to 0, protection abilities don't seem to apply properly anymore. When I was using Bacchus and I used my Chuck while being on 0 protections, I actually didn't get any added protections, even though, judging from the stats, I should have at least gotten around 30 protections. Apparently, protections can't scale properly when you get down to 0 or something like that. Not entirely sure how it works. Also, the chuck seems to somehow be affected by the protection reduction as well, even if you use chuck after the reductions have been applied. The order of application is also completely irrelevant for Nemesis, as percentage reduction always gets counted first, and apparently this refreshes and checks back whenever another kind of reduction is applied. It's fine to just go for the ult first or go for executioner first, because in both cases you will end up with the 86% reduction and then get the flat reduction afterwards. A simple conclusion here could be to just build health to prevent Nemesis from dealing that much damage to you by taking all your protections, as you will drop down to 0 protections in most scenarios anyways. The problem with that is that Nemesis typically wants to build Kins at some point. Kin size works extremely well against high health targets, so in the end, you're doomed either way. All of this could theoretically still be countered by Sprint or Winged Blade simply by getting away from Nemesis, but with Wrath being such a beneficial active at the moment, because it gives you more LD clear, which is good as Nemesis, Red Pot is gone, so your aggression will be lowered anyways, and this is the only way to get it back, and it having a hot CC, you have a new problem. Nemesis can ult you and then stun you with Wrath. You have no option to get out of that unless you have a cleanse in your kit or someone else can cleanse for you, or you have beats, but that's a very limited amount of characters, and hardly any god in the game can afford to buy both sprint and beats just to counter a single character. You would think that there should be some kind of diminishing returns for protection reduction as there is for anything else, meaning that if you get too much of it, the effectiveness gets lowered and only a small percentage still gets applied. But that isn't the case. It might be necessary for Nemesis in her current state, or there might be other ways around it, but as it stands, I'm not quite sure if Nemesis really should have this potential to completely negate any character's defenses in the game with the right items. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching, I hope this was helpful for you. Duke Sloth, out.